So this quick little video is going to show you how to get from armature to clay on the armature. Okay, so first we want to make sure that our armature is kind of positioned the way we want it to be positioned. Let's see, I want there to be a little twist, but things will probably move as I'm playing around. I'm having a little trouble keeping the base where I want it to be. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so we have our clay conditioned. Okay, if you haven't conditioned, if you don't know how to condition the clay, go back and make sure that you watch that video about conditioning the clay. And then we want to put the clay on the armature. And at this point, you are just trying to cover the armature. You're not trying to add details or do anything fancy. It's just about covering the armature in clay. Okay? So, on most things that you use, you're going to, most things that you make, you're going to have kind of flat pieces that you just need to kind of smash onto the armature. The technical term is smashing. So I've got my base here, and the armature moves. You don't need your armature to be super rigid. It will help strengthen the form, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't move at all. Okay, but between the armature and the clay, you're going to end up with a nice firm structure that won't break. You can see that my clay does leave a residue. I can kind of get rid of that. A lot of that I can just kind of pick up with another piece of clay. And then if you have a huge amount of residue on your table at the end, you can kind of scrape it off. So you see how I'm just kind of getting clay onto the, I keep wanting to call it a maquette. It's not a maquette, it's an armature. Two very different words. So you just keep smashing it on there until you've got it all covered. And then basically when you're done, you're gonna let it dry. Well, let it harden a little bit, so that, you know, leave it for like an hour or two, or overnight, so that it gets nice and dense again. Remember, I don't know, from the last video that I just filmed, I conditioned this hunk of clay yesterday, and it is very hard now. So once you let the Sculpey kind of sit for a little bit, it will harden up again. Not so much so that it will never move, but just enough so that the armature, everything won't be moving all over the place. So I'm just taking my flat pieces and putting them around, and I think I'm really stretching my limits with these long spindly things, but that is what I like to do. We'll see if they hold up. They might not. And whatever structure you are working on, you'll end up having some sorts of challenges that come up. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that structure. It just means that you got to work through that. Remember that I have office hours if you need to touch base, so that we can look at kind of the whole scope of a project. You know, sometimes I think that this process without a professor in the room is probably the hardest part of the semester, because figuring out, I feel like every semester, figuring out how the armature is going to work, it does take, you've got to look a number of steps ahead, and that's kind of hard to do when you've never made one of these before. And so having me in the room and being able to talk that through with me can be really, really helpful for students. So feel free to make use of my office hours to get some input. So just getting some clay on these things, and even in the frame. Yeah, it's just about getting the clay on there. And if it seems like it's not holding up too well, then maybe now is the time to, if it seems like this is too long, I could cut it down. If it seemed, just kind of play around with things. But in lots of cases, you might just kind of prop up, I don't know how, yeah, you could just kind of prop something up so that it stays where you want it to stay. That can be quite helpful. And so my clay it's very warm right now, and it's very pliable. So it's really easy to put stuff on. It's really easy to put stuff on. But the problem is I can't manipulate it. I can't add details when it's like this. And it just won't stay put. Like, I don't want it to be like this, but getting it to stay where it needs to stay is very hard at this stage. So that's why you need to let it harden just a little bit. It doesn't mean that it's drying. It's just kind of setting, but then it can all be played around with afterwards. You can even just take it all off of the maquette. I mean, the armature. I keep calling it a maquette. So the whole time that I'm working, I'm looking at the whole thing, and I'm looking at it, you can't do details. You've got to do the overall form. So think of how the overall form is functioning in space. And these are the big question. Like, how do I get these to look good, look interesting from every angle? And that's tricky. So figuring that out and then kind of propping them where you want them. And I would recommend, whatever you do, make sure that it's upright to some extent, so when it's drying, so that you have a sense of like the actual balance of the form, even if you're propping it with all kinds of things. And so that is the little demo on smashing Sculpey onto your armature.